want to welcome you all to a discussion of white privilege in American society, a conversation with the 2017 Collegiate Debate National Champions, hailing from Rutgers University, Devane Murphy and Nicole, Nave. They really made history because they're not just champions, they're double champions, winning the championship of the Cross-Examination Debate Association and the national championship of the National Debate Tournament. That's sort of akin to the Triple Crown of racing. It's only been done twice before in American collegiate debate history. First time, as a matter of fact, was done by a Newark debater, Elijah Smith, and his partner, who happens to be the coach of Devane and Nicole, Ryan Walsh. They did it for the first time ever, and Nicole and Devane did it for the second time, but they own one piece of history singularly. They're double champions, winning the championship of this Cross-Examination Debate Association National Tournament and the championship of the National Debate Tournament. There's only one time in history before that was done, and it was done, in fact, by a Newark debater, Elijah Smith, and his partner, Ryan Walsh, is actually the coach of both Devane and Nicole in their march to these two championships. But Nicole and Devane own singularly an historical mark in college debate. Nicole was first speaker in the Cross-Examination Debate Association tournament, and her partner Devane was first speaker in the National Debate Tournament. And that's akin to being the most valuable player in the Super Bowl, both from the same team. So, congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brent. You've made your city very proud.
Thank you.
So actually, Devane, Nicole, what I really want to do here today is to have a conversation with you all, sort of the one we were supposed to have over dinner and wine last year, and you know, our audience will just sort of eavesdrop on it. You know, your double championship is just so incredibly historic on so many different levels. But I kind of think that the competitive victory pales in comparison to the impact that the argumentation that you and your teammates and other Newark debaters have been advancing on the collegiate debate scene. That I want to focus on that educational piece and that what I think is a transformational argumentation, not just for American collegiate debate, but for society as a whole. So I think probably the best place to start is what debaters do with the definition of terms.
Okay.
So, and this may seem like a naive question, and it's an honest question from me, but I think probably more honest for our audience. What do you mean by white privilege?
Okay, so I have the academic response. All right, so I think that white privilege is like access to certain privileges or certain things in society for certain groups of people that are not accessible for other groups. So when I say certain things, so for instance, being able to work at a job with everybody else that looks just like you. Being able to go through a store, walk through a store without anybody watching you or being suspicious of you. Being able to be out in public spaces and not have a certain amount of attention drawn to you just by your presence. It does just like those kinds of factors factor into like examples of privilege, but I think that white privilege in and of itself is an access to a system of power that not everybody has, but is particular to a certain group of people.
I get this feeling, and I'm sure that this is what you mean to portray, that it's something that pervades all of American society. Mm-hmm. You know, from my own perspective, this may come as a shock to you, but I am an American patriot. I do believe in American exceptionalism, and I think the exceptionalism is that we are unique in human history as being a diverse society, a multicultural society. I don't think that experiment has been done by human beings anywhere else ever in human society, and it's our most important national resource, our diversity, our multicultural nature, because the conflict and the clashing of cultures causes creativity to come to the fore. But I think that white privilege blunts all of that.
I can agree with that.
And so, I'd like you to not speak, because this is a conversation, talk to me for a while about how you feel that white privilege is, well, do you feel that it's the root, at this point is the root of our most basic problems that we're trying to confront to move forward?
The root of our basic problems? I think that's a good start. I think that's a good way for us to start a dialogue, because I think that incorporative of the conversation of white privilege, I think you have to have a history lesson, or at least a conversation about where it goes back to in the context of America. And then from there move forward. And I think that the conversation of white privilege in America starts almost in its beginning. The context of the Constitution and what does it mean to be a citizen, and what does it mean to be able to own land, and slavery, which is fundamental to the construction of the United States. And I think that the conversation of white privilege is grounded in a lot of the beliefs and a lot of the interactions and relationships that we had from that time that kind of sprinkled to our current social strata that we have today. The context of 5 black people being 3 black people, 3/5 compromise, the context of chattel and not being able to access personhood because the 1854 black person was a chair, so those conversations, I think those are, white privilege definitely is grounded in that context of like what is not person.
Right. Some people would say, well, that's the past. We've gotten
Well,
beyond
that's part
that
of the
now.
problem, Brent. So the problem with white privilege is it refuses to acknowledge and confront those ugly pasts and histories that have happened as a result of its existence. The reason why it's become such a pervasive problem is because it is the thing that we don't want to talk about. It is the part of the history book that we want to take out. There have been teachers and different schools that have talked about taking slavery out of the history books of America because we don't want to talk about those things. We don't want to confront those realities. We also don't want to hear that we are white people and sometimes we get privileged.
Or if they take it out, they romanticize it. Like what was the case in like Maplewood or something like that, where they had like a slave auction, where they like had a silent auction in the classroom where they were buying kids, so like they romanticized that period in history, which really means that we never deal with the intricacies of white privilege. Even if it's written out in the textbook, or it's written there to be something that we ought study, but not in the gruesomeness of it or brutality of what it created, but more so the intricacies of the economics of slavery, right? That that focus shifting away from the brutality that shaped the interactions that we have and the racial tensions that we have now don't get talked about.
I hear you on that. Absolutely, the historical side. And I think a lot of people who recognize it today. When I think of the audience that I want to speak to, I think of the white people that I know, my family, my circle of friends who are white, those who are white. And they're all good people. None of them are racist, well, except for a few. Every family has a few. And they recoil at the idea of racism. But I know that most haven't gone through the uncomfortable self-introspection or conversation, more the conversation. Because this conversation should really be happening in white communities, not black communities, because it's a white problem, not a black problem. The black community is a victim of it, but the white community is the cause of it. So that's where the conversation should occur and it's not. So I think about sort of, tell me if I'm wrong on this or right, that white people need to have an introspection or a conversation over when you see a group of black youths standing on a street corner. Is the word that comes to your mind gang, they're up to no good? And then you see a group of white youths on a street corner and the word that comes to your mind is a bunch of friends who are hanging out? Because if you have those different, and honestly, if people are honest, they do have those different visceral,
and vibes.
and that's the beginning, that's the visceral element of white privilege. Or I just wonder how many white folks in intelligentsia and academia could identify a single or two black intellectuals that they have learned from. Not whom they respect for their rhetoric, their ability to speak, but whom they've actually learned from and respect on an intellectual level. Those to me are conversations that are painful, uncomfortable to have, but you need to have, because I think that unless you, as a white person, confront that, then your view of the criminal justice system, hiring and firing, schools, is all almost unconsciously twisted by that.
Absolutely, it absolutely does change your perception. If you go completely ignoring the way that things really are and refusing to confront that past, that history, the present that is still here, then you will always get the same outcome, the same results that exist now, which is that immediate segregation that is constantly manifesting itself in different ways throughout our society.
I think the champion of non-confrontation that I could point to is Donald Trump, right? He doesn't want to confront his history of like racist renting and his rentals in real estate. He doesn't want to confront Trump University scandal. He doesn't want to confront the influx of scandals in his administration. But like that non-conformity or that non-confrontation, I think is important to understand a look into the minds of certain white Americans that feel that their experience is one way and that is the way. The way I see it is the way I see it, and that's how it's going to be. And that non-confrontation basically allows you to move on with politics as usual, but then what it does is pushes communities that need the help to the side, to the wayside. And we can see that with just the way in which his politics has manifested itself, with the healthcare debacle that would, cause me in particular to lose my healthcare. You know what I'm saying? And the ability to not confront the privileged attitude of being able to be like, I can get healthcare, why can you not be able to? And in that conversation, in that sentence in and of itself just describes a lack of understanding certain social differences, understanding economic differences, understanding a generational gap that, some people have a 17-year history of family history, 17-generation family tree in this country where they can pull back 3 generations and get the benefits of the bank account. Whereas my ancestors, 4 generations maybe, that like slavery started in America in 1619. And that's not to say that my family started back then, but at most 4 or 5 generations. You know what I'm saying? And that generational gap and familial gap is something that is ignored in that sentence in and of itself. Right? If I can do it, you can do it too. And I think that is the language of the land right now. That's the language of certain communities that means that we will never confront what we need to do.
This is America, the space for all opportunity, equal rights. That's the narrative that we're kind of sold throughout our entire lives as Americans, is that we should believe in America and understand that it has our backs. As long as we trust America, we will inevitably get the benefits. But that story is very different and more complicated for those who are a little darkened in America.
It is. It's a lot more complicated.
So, I I kind of lost the thread of what I was going to ask you about, but it will come back to me as I babble here for a minute in our conversation. What is it that you feel that white America has to come to grips with, and how do they come to grips with this thing that is preventing us from fully enjoying our natural resource of diversity?
I think they really have to come to terms with themselves. I think that starting with yourself is key. So self-reflexivity. So kind of the example that you were saying earlier about, you know, when people are walking on the corner, what is your perception of the black children that you see at the corner? This is where you need to look. How do you feel when you see those children? Do you feel that they are gang members? Do you feel that they are just children? Once you get the kind of senses of where you are in the status of the world, that's when you kind of begin to understand and create that change.
So how do we do that?
Understanding privilege first. So when we understand white privilege, we have to break those words down separately because there are two different things that have two very different meanings. So white would be that system of authority that gives you that authority. Privilege are all the benefits that comes along with being white, right? So understanding those two things separately, but also simultaneously, is how we begin to make those steps to move forward to the understanding of what that action does. Because white privilege isn't something I can put my hand on. It's not something that I can physically see. It is an invincible monster that acts selfishly on its own.
I think you can see that sometimes.
Well, yeah, you can see the problems, like manifestations of it, but you can't label that and be like, this is
White privilege.
Yeah, and now I get back to what I wanted to talk about. So I'm a child of the 60s. You know. I was very deeply moved involved in the revolutionary socialist movement when I was a youth.
Okay.
I'm different now, but and I would describe myself now as an American patriot. I refuse to allow someone like Trump to take the mantle of patriotism because I don't think that believes in what is the spirit of America. But in the 60s, we kind of had this discussion and decided as a movement to focus on institutional racism. And I think we did a fairly good job of that, the civil rights movement, the desegregation movement, but we consciously decided it doesn't matter whether this white guy standing in the street corner hates black people or not. That's his problem. It's not a social problem. And I think what we've come to realize now is for any further progress to occur, the fact that that guy on the street corner hates black people is a social problem. And the fact that he feels that's okay is a social problem. And I'll give you an example of why I feel that way. I think most, maybe 51%, most American police officers want to do their job with justice in mind. But when they go into that job with this dichotomy, I see a group of black kids hanging out on the street corner, I think gang, they're up to no good. If I see a group of white kids hanging on the street corner, I think a bunch of friends hanging out. The way I approach the two groups is going to be entirely different. And the reaction is almost going to be unconscious. And so we can't solve that problem of policing, which is so important for everyone, unless we attack white privilege, critique white privilege on an individual level.
Yeah, I think that one of the mishaps of focusing purely on the institution and focusing purely on systemic issues is that it first ignores that the people who feel a certain way and have a particular relationship that is toxic to certain communities or communities that are other than themselves, those are the ones that will become the policymakers in the future. And those are the ones that are going to be the voters in certain localities. And those are the ones that are going to be the public advocates. And those are going to be the parents to students. Those are going to be the ones that are going to parent-teacher conferences and saying that doing slave auctions in classes is a good idea. And I think that the institution must change. I will agree with that. But I do think that focusing on the interpersonal relationships that we have with one another can't be left to the wayside, because those interpersonal relationships essentially are what shape politics, right? They shape the way in which the criminal justice system manifests itself. Like you said with policing, right? When a police officer sees a black person compared to when they see a white person, they think thug in comparison to the citizen. Not dealing with the interpersonal relationship has the implication of, Eric Garner getting choked down the street corner and then no justice being served, right? It's because it is a predetermined notion because of the interpersonal relationship that we have not dealt with that allows or justifies certain forms of violence to continue and just to be commonplace or mundane even, that go under the wayside. So I think that a grouping of both institutional focus as well as our interpersonal needs to be how we move forward, because the system, the civil rights movement did its thing, but the system isn't perfect. Qualified immunity allows most police officers that do heinous crimes that black people get off to get off with no not being touched. You have school systems and people get murdered. Like Kendrick Johnson got murdered in Florida in 2014, and all of his organs got replaced with newspaper. No justice being served, right? But because it was or even Trayvon Martin, right? Because stand your ground and certain laws are in place that justify things in the abstract, but then when they're applied to certain instances, they're colorblind. And they'll look at like the racial intensity that caused Zimmerman to want to kill Trayvon Martin. And so I think that a lack of understanding that we are people and that we have certain relationships and there are already implicit biases that we have with one another, we need to incorporate that into the way in which we deal with larger issues.
Yeah, so these things that you're talking about, both of you are talking about, very passionately, can't be legislated. We can't pass a civil rights law to undo white privilege.
Absolutely.
That's true.
That has to be a change in the national psyche. It's far more difficult than what we undertook in the 1960s. So how do we do that?
Well, we have to understand that these systems didn't come out of nowhere. They're the individuals who create, maintain, and manifest these systems and implement those things that exist that allow these things to happen in the first place. So understanding us as individuals and not as an entirety or a collective is how we begin this process and how we begin that building, is knowing that the world is not simply a blanket of things, but there are people who exist inside of it as individuals that construct these things and make it all happen.
I think a really good place to start could be forcing a dialogue. Not forcing a dialogue, but rather a dialogue that is not just an echo chamber. Oftentimes we end up talking to people that think the same way that we do, that look the same, that look the same way that we do. And so often what that means
internal
is
conversation.
Right, it's an internal conversation that we mean that we're bouncing our internal thoughts off of one another, which just reinforces what we already feel about one another. I think that there needs to be a dialogue that is opened up between the communities that don't want to talk to one another. So opening a dialogue between Nutley and Newark, or opening a dialogue in the classroom between parents in Maplewood of black students and white students, and having a conversation about the curriculum. I also think that we need to start with a level of education. What are we learning and what are we teaching students, right? What are we teaching them about their relationships with others? I remember when I was in high school, even in Catholic schools, I went to Catholic school. When I was in Catholic school, social studies was Mesopotamia and the Euphrates, Tigris and the Euphrates River, that's one. And in high school, the deepest that we got on race was a poster of Bethune-Cookman College or a poster about Martin Luther King on February. But like, I think that there needs to be a more robust conversation that's riddled, not just riddled, but intricate or intimately tied to the way in which we learn. It needs to be a more interpersonal, so we move beyond having to see color as a determining factor of how we interact with one another. There needs to be something more incorporative of seeing for who we are, not just what we look like. You know?
So we got about 2 minutes left in this segment. So have either of you watched United Shades of America on CNN?
We haven't. We don't have cable.
I watch it quite often. It's a, oh God, I really butchered his name. He's a comedian, a black comedian. But what he's doing is going around and talking to people outside of his comfort zone.
Right.
And the whole projection of the show is we need to have uncomfortable conversations.
Absolutely. Nothing is comfortable. Like, no progress in America has ever been comfortable.
But this progress needs to occur this can't occur in Washington. It could, but it's not going to be effective to occur in Washington, D.C. It has to happen in homes,
Yes.
in families,
Right.
in communities.
Well, I think there's a point to be made that opening a dialogue on that format of the political level is a way to segue into conversations in the home. Having conversations on a political platform about race will inevitably open conversations about race. O.J. Simpson was a national trial that happened. It was a big trial. It was televised, which opened up the conversation about race. Jesse Jackson running for president opened up the conversation about race. Obama opened up the conversation about race, even though he was a universalist and wanted to be, yes, we can, and all of us together. But a more robust conversation about race on that level won't be, I don't think it's detrimental, but it could be beneficial.
Except that I think it's been too safe.
Yeah, that's what I said. It has to change.
I think
It has
that
to change,
the
yeah.
conversation has spared a lot of feelings, and it hasn't been as honest as it could be.
That's what I love about your final round at NDTs. You spared no feelings.
Right.
I had lots of different reactions to it, and I watched it with my son-in-law, and he had lots of different reactions. So we're going to get to that in the next segment.
saw it, right?
I did. I watched it live. So we're going to talk about your impact through debate in the next segment. I want to thank you for this conversation.
Of
and
course.
Thank you all for watching or eavesdropping on our conversation. And the next one, we're going to focus more laser on the impact inside the world of debate, which I believe has an impact